Hi, I'm going to be exposing a couple of social hypocrisies that are going on in our society right now that have been normalised, and it is actually quite disturbing to realise the levels to which these hypocrisies have been normalised, to the extent that people just accept it. And we really are talking about people straining at a gnat here while happily swallowing a camel. Okay, so we're starting off with this ban on smoking, and people have accepted it because, you know, smoking's really bad for us. It causes lung cancer, and actually every type of cancer, if you smoke and you've got any kind of cancer, then it's because you smoked. It's the basic gist of what's going on. And tobacco smoke is so dangerous that pub staff have had severe health problems as a direct result of breathing in people's smoke, secondary smoke, and not just people in pubs, people working in any public buildings where they're expected to breathe in cigarette smoke. It's an obnoxious substance, it's very dangerous. We shouldn't do it around children, and I'm not saying I don't agree with all those things, okay, but what I am saying is that when you look at the stuff that we're breathing in every single day, children are breathing in, like for example plutonium particles, various man-made radiation particles, various chemicals, dioxides, stuff that they're spraying on our crops and spraying in the air, and stuff that they're putting in the water and the food and the chemicals. You know, really, what's going, you know, a bit of smoke from tobacco is actually minimal. You know, you are talking about a gnat here. Of course, it's very much more severe for people who are working in places like pubs. And prior to the smoking ban in all public buildings, the majority of pubs had a separate room for smokers, and really they could have just set up a separate bar, couldn't they, you know, like a vending machine type bar, so that staff didn't have to put themselves in that environment. But no, we'll ban smoking in public places, which, as I say, I'm not saying that it isn't protecting public health to do that. I have been a bit alarmed to see that even electronic cigarettes are being banned from trains and pubs and restaurants, which I don't really understand, because the main problem with tobacco is in the tar, and the electronic cigarettes just blow out nicotine. So, you know, I think you're talking overkill there, and it starts to feel a bit over control, too much control over people. Is this really for people's health, or are the authorities that be concerned about another impact of nicotine? Because nicotine is known to sharpen thinking. It doesn't act like alcohol or other drugs where it alters, it's mind altering. Nicotine is known to focus the mind. Okay, so if people are sitting around smoking nicotine from an electronic cigarette, perhaps they're a bit more focused on what they're discussing. Maybe, I don't know, it's just a theory, because I grew up during the 60s and 70s in this country, and during that period I remember that in every single home and school there was asbestos, and the buildings were made of asbestos. Asbestos was everywhere. There was lead in petrol. Kids and people were breathing it in all the time for like 2 or 3 decades. They'd been breathing in all this asbestos, lead, okay, and then on top of that, coal fumes, because everybody had coal fires virtually, and also the amount of chemicals that were just flowing out of factories, it's straight into rivers and canals. You know, our waterways were really terrible. They were polluted during the 70s, late 60s and 70s. We had to clean them all up. There had to be regulations brought in to stop you know, corporate chemical plants, like at the time ICI, just, you know, dumping stuff into the rivers and things. So, you know, there were a host of things that could have else have been causing lung cancer. And actually, as people have stopped smoking, there's less and less people smoke. Still, the numbers of people contracting cancer are rising, and we're finding all other causes for cancer besides smoking. So it does look like the cigarette smoke somehow has been used as a bit of a scapegoat to distract from all the other things that cause cancer. So they've used this to put massive high taxes on tobacco, and generally to blame humanity for our own problems. You know, well, it's your problem, you shouldn't have smoked. You've got cancer because you're stupid. You've been smoking. Okay. So people don't smoke. Oh, well, you've got cancer because there's something wrong with your genes, or because there's this or that. There's so many things now that are causing cancer, that are known to cause cancer beyond smoking. And though, according to this article, the medical board saying that heart attacks have gone down by 20%. Is that just related to smoking, or is it the fact that people are more aware now and are having less fatty diets? A lot of people are turning vegetarian. So is that due to the smoking ban? We can't really say, because it is actually just a supposition right now, because there's been no actual studies done into it. So that's the gnat. Because, you know, our government is so concerned about public health and safety. We've banned smoking tobacco indoors and made all kinds of restrictions on tobacco, because it's such a deadly, dangerous substance that threatens the whole of human society. And so now we're going to compare that. Here's the camel that we're going to just casually swallow. Okay, we're going to strain at the gnat. I'm going to swallow this camel. So I've shared this before, this research performed by Professor Christopher Exley, and also the studies, the French studies that were performed, that was studying mice, did studies on mice, came up with some exactly the same conclusions. Well, actually these were earlier. It's the only difference between the research done at, for example, the Gherardi Institute and Professor Christopher Exley, I think at Keele University in Staffordshire, is that he focused on human brain tissue. So what he's done is he's studied the brain tissue of people who've died who were known to have autism specifically, and what he's found is that in those people's brain tissue there's been a massively high amount of aluminium. That is what he's found. So, you know, this is the basic gist of it. Aluminium adjuvant injection. The adjuvant's what carries the pathogen that your body's going to fight and build an immunity to, okay? The adjuvant particles travel into the brain. That happens because the pathogen travels up straight into the up to the lymph glands, and from there it travels directly to the brain, and then that triggers IL-6 production and microglial activation in the brain that then triggers autism. Okay, we know that aluminium adjuvant from vaccines goes straight into the brain. We know it triggers the production of a cytokine known as IL-6. that has been implicated in autism, and we know it also triggers microglial activation, which also triggers autism. So microglial activation is not just implicated in autism, it does actually trigger autism. So he was wondering from his study how it was possible for, you know, why was it that people with autism in particular had the, how did these huge amounts of aluminium manage to find a way into the human brain? Well, in France, from their studies, and I'll leave you this link, and I do advise you, please read through it yourself, okay? This one is from the Faculty of Medicine of the Sciences and Technology at the University of Paris. Okay, so, you know, have a look at that. And this one is a quote from the Gerardi Research Group in France. And what they studied the toxicity and transport of aluminium Al adjuvant in mice. So apparently what they discovered is that the lesser dosages are causing the most toxicity. And just to basically point it out, the reason for that is because if you put a very large high dosage, intense inflammation at the injection site would form granulomas, you see. And what the granulomas does is they provide protection from the L-adjuvant toxicity. Apparently the granuloma prevented L-adjuvant particles from leaving the injection site. So this is why the very small doses of aluminium adjuvant that are being injected in are causing higher toxicity, is because the body is not being alerted to develop the granuloma that will then prevent any of that toxin from entering into the bloodstream. So it appears now, from what has been explained here, is that in the context of massive development of vaccine-based strategies worldwide, the present study may suggest that aluminium adjuvant toxic kinetics and safety require re-evaluation. Okay, so they do require re-evaluation, don't they? Because at the end of the day, we don't really want to take any risks with our children, do we? We're not going to sit around and say, well, you know, we'll do a few more studies and see how that goes, because we are aware that the rates of autism in children have been increasing exponentially every year since aluminium adjuvant has been used in vaccines. Now, this was one of the things that I found disturbing from, as I've researched into this even more now, is that I've discovered that it was only about 40 years ago that suddenly this aluminium adjuvant was included in vaccines. You know, and let's also remember the mercury as well. There's no specific mention of that here about mercury, but it may be that the same applies to mercury as applies to the aluminium, that although it's only a very little bit of mercury, it is actually more toxic, because for the same reasons. There's no granulomas being formed at the injection site, and the mercury is getting right in rather than the body fighting against it. So, you know, that's something else to be looking at, isn't it? Because if this is from aluminium, then maybe the same thing's happening with the mercury that we know is in vaccines as well. And we know for sure that mercury damages the brain. We've known that for a very, very long time. Now, I've also written to Professor Christopher Exley, and asked him if he would consider also studying non-autistic people who've died, you know, to study their brain tissue. people who've had behavioural problems or depression and other problems that our children are suffering in ever-increasing numbers. You know, we're talking about millions of children throughout the Western world, so-called developed nations, being prescribed antidepressants, antipsychotics, Ritalin, you know, all kinds of psych drugs are being prescribed to our children who, it seems, are all suddenly developing ADHD and learning difficulties and various bipolar disorder, all kinds of mental health problems, even schizophrenia. You know, all these things are increasing. And is it because of the mercury and the aluminium in the vaccines? Because people have been saying, oh, well, years ago, you know, you just give them a good iodine and they'd sit still. But no, that isn't, you know, this is, sorry, no, this is something else that's going on with children. Their behaviour patterns. The fact that children are getting depressed. You know, I was a child who had a lot to be depressed about. But I don't remember being depressed. I remember being very disturbed and traumatised and upset. But I don't remember being actually depressed as a little child. And I think the fact that this childhood depression is being diagnosed is a very serious thing if children are feeling depressed. So what this means is that we do need to understand that it's time to stop immediately injecting our children, don't we? Because if we can immediately stop smoking in public places overnight in order for the interest of protecting public health, okay, then for the sake of children's health, you know, then maybe we need to ban this overnight as well. We need to immediately stop injecting our children with toxins, with dangerous toxins that are causing them brain damage. That is a serious thing. We're talking about, you know, the difference between a child perhaps getting a whiff of tobacco smoke, which it would have to happen regularly and heavily over a long-term period, really, for it to have any real impact on the child's respiratory system, okay, or actually injecting children with substances that we know run a high risk of that child being brain damaged. So these things really just need to stop, don't they? It just needs to stop. Now, like I say, they only started using aluminium adjuvant in vaccines about 40 years ago. Now, a lot of people have noticed about vaccines, had started to notice a correlation between vaccines and the rise of allergies. And, you know, that again is, there is a strong link between vaccines and allergies. And often it can be due to other things that are included in the vaccines, like, for example, peanut oil. And so now people are starting to realise that, you know, the body is an intelligent biology. It's an intelligent biological machine. It is operated by intelligence operating within the very cellular structure of our body. So it stands to reason, doesn't it, that if you inject, like, a dangerous pathogen into somebody, that, you know, a very small amount of it, that you want the body to build up a natural antibodies to. So you've got this, so your immune system will protect you from, if you ever come across that pathogen again, okay? Well, if you include it in that mix, say, a bit of peanut oil, which normally is not injected into the bloodstream. There's no way that peanut oil is ever going to get into anybody's bloodstream, no matter how many peanuts they eat. okay? But if you're injecting that straight into somebody's bloodstream as a child, then it stands to reason that a portion out of all the millions of children vaccinated every year, that have, more and more of them are going to start, their bodies will immediately, they recognise peanut, anything from peanut has gone into the body, it is a pathogen that needs to be attacked, you see. And that somehow these vaccines, because there's so many and the children are so young when they're receiving them, is that it can bombard the immune system and actually cause it to overreact to everything. You know, so we need to be learned to be a lot kinder, a lot more gentler with ourselves, don't we? And, you know, take things very, very slowly. And so anyway, because there was this connection that was made between the rise of allergies and vaccines, there was this connection, they decided, the American Health Board, I think it was, they decided suddenly this was a very serious problem. It needed to be immediately addressed, immediately, by the inclusion of aluminium adjuvant. Now, to make aluminium adjuvant is quite a laborious process that has to be operated, that has to be performed in a lab. And you know, the price of vaccines substantially increased the moment this adjuvant was included, so there was huge profits to be made out of it, huge profits to be made out of aluminium, which is an abundant material on Earth. Suddenly it's put through this scientific process and then is included in vaccines. Suddenly, you know, there's loads of money to be made out of aluminium and everybody's happy, everybody's getting rich. Then it starts to come in slowly more into the vaccines, and people are saying, oh, my child was perfectly happy, aware, active, had the vaccines, suddenly she's autistic. Suddenly she's got this illness, that illness. So, but oh no, sorry parent, you just don't understand it. Your child probably was autistic. It just didn't show. It's just that you noticed it now, you know. But Professor Christopher Exley and the French scientists have proven without a doubt that actually, no, this aluminium is going into the brain. It's getting right into the brain's neurology, okay, and it is impacting to cause autism and probably a host of other behavioural and psychological problems. Okay, so that is the exposure there, isn't it, between the camel and the gnat. So there's doubt now. There's doubt that the official story that vaccines aren't causing autism, there's doubt that those people are right. And if there's doubt over our children's health and safety, then come on, let's just stop this now. This needs to be immediately stopped. Now, most disturbingly, and, you know, this is really, really disturbing. This is from Christopher Exley's blog on the Hippocratic Post, blogging on the world's medical stories. And this is by Christopher Exley, and he's concerned because the media, perhaps the most deafening response to his research has been the tsunami of silence perpetuated by all mainstream media almost globally. Okay, actually it was covered by the Mail Online, and it is true that a lot of research like this gets dumped into the gutter press of the Mail Online so people can read it, and no matter, it makes the information instantly invalidated almost, because it's in the Mail, it's the gutter press. Yeah, oh, there's been some wacko scientific study somewhere saying this, that and the other. Look, we're letting you know, but, you know, you take it with a pinch of salt, don't you? Because it's in the Daily Mail, it's not in the Guardian or the Independent. So apparently it was shared 60,000 times. So people, even though it was in the Mail, you know, people haven't been hoodwinked by that, and they've shared it 60,000 times. And what he says, while I remain completely in support of the need to communicate scientific research as widely as possible, I was not prepared for the vitriol, largely anonymous, which accompanied our publication. I have been elucidating upon the potential dangers of the aluminium age for 34 years now, but I have never before had my life threatened openly. I can only assume that our research has weighed very heavily on the toes of those who will not counter the possibility that not all vaccines are 100% safe. So who doesn't want to counter the possibility? That isn't actually a possibility, is it? It's a probability when it comes to our children's health and safety. Are we going to take that risk? We've got the evidence. We've got the astounding numbers of autistic children that were being told, oh, well, what it was that years ago, you know, they just wasn't properly diagnosed. No, that is not true. People would have noticed. People notice. Okay, this is something that has been happening in the last decades, more and more and more, as more and more vaccines are being produced, and our children are receiving more and more vaccines. So, and his life has been threatened. That's the kind of society we're living in. That a scientist working at Keele University, performing his research, proper scientific research, and is sharing the results. The press doesn't want to know, and his life is being threatened. And so just very quickly now, I'm going to share the other immediate hypocrisy that's happening in our society, which is the issue around child abuse. Okay? So all our police, they aren't really interested in investigating child abuse because it's a minor concern against minors. And if minors report crimes against themselves, they're just a minor crime report, and they're only of minor significance. Understand that the legal term minor, the spell it casts on social consciousness. So, you know, child abuse is the ugly, filthy truth. But meanwhile, okay, what we're supposed to do, you know, our police are very busy seizing drugs, investigating drugs, prosecuting drugs crimes. Our streets are full of drugs. Drug addicts are everywhere. Since this prohibition on drugs has been going on in our society, it just creates crime. That's all it does. It creates crime and criminals. It demands criminals. It demands new addicts out of every generation because, you know, it's a consumer product that's very highly priced precisely because it's prohibited, and all kinds of people are making money on the side out of it, and putting those funds for illicit purposes. Children are suffering abuse and being bought and sold in the arena of this drugs market. These drugs are being used to entrap and enslave children into being sex slaves, because you know, all they have to do, vulnerable child somewhere, get them addicted to drugs one way or another, bang, yeah, you can have these drugs, but, you know, you're going to have to do what I tell you because you're only going to be able to get these drugs from me. Now, the point here is that this hall was seized on the strength of a tip-off. You see, a tip-off. And the police are there, banging doors down, getting the drugs. Neighbour, oh, can smell something right going on in there, can smell plants, you know, I know what they smell like, bang, police are there, doors down, drug seizure. Oh, I've seen a lot of people, something going on there, yeah, let's go in. But a child, you know, look at all the children who reported crime reports against, say, Jimmy Savile. No, no, we're not going to investigate him. No, no, sorry, go away. Go away. How many hundreds of children did he abuse and damage? Now, we're talking about, apparently, a substance, these illegal substances that cause public consciousness brain damage. Well, I can tell you, child abuse causes brain damage. And actually, child abuse creates the kind of consciousness that children are going to, as adults, going to be relying more on drugs. Okay? There is a direct correlation between child abuse and drug use in later life. Because people need something when they've been robbed. So they've got a choice, haven't they? A load of psych drugs, or they're going to go for the illegal natural substances, aren't they? You know, and this is a very interesting article, which is a study on Paris, where they found out that the socio-economically privileged actually use more drugs for leisure over a weekend and stuff, while the socio-economically deprived proportionately use less drugs or stay away from them altogether. And the thing is that commonly the people who use drugs like this, the socio-economically privileged, who use drugs just for a bit of fun, parties, leisure, they're not seen as abusing drugs. The people who are commonly judged as abusing drugs are the people who are actually using them because they're trying to recover and deal with severe psychological and emotional problems that have been caused directly through child abuse. They're commonly the ones that'll end up in prison, or, you know, serving some kind of sentence, or with a criminal record because they've turned to drugs. But actually, the abuse of drugs is happening by these type of people, okay, because they're just using them for a bit of fun. These substances are for a purpose, and prohibition is an insult to our intelligence, because we have a right to decide these things are made by nature for us to choose to use or not. And the way that you do it is you educate people, don't you? So everybody knows, well, you know, you don't take more than 2 paracetamol at a time. Yes, the packets say you can go and buy it. If you take more than 5 or 6, you could get seriously ill. You could die, actually. So we don't tend to do it. We trust ourselves as human beings to be able to be educated and informed enough, generally, not to overdose. Some people choose to. That's up to them. We're never going to stop people choosing to do stupid things. But by majority, people don't choose to do stupid things. That's why we can all drive around on the roads daily, and actually car crashes are quite minimal, aren't they? Because people try to behave and live in a responsible manner. And so, you know, the people who are abusing drugs right now, the people who are riding on top of this world, who are who live at the upper social echelons, who are having very nice lives as compared to the bulk majority of humanity, who are living in abject poverty and really suffering and have no rights whatsoever, and actually are slaves, and are the ones that are doing the crimes, that are being employed to commit the crimes and serve the time and suffer the consequences of the shootings and all the horror that goes along with this disgusting criminal underworld that prohibition sustains and has created. So, you know, again, we've got the thing, haven't we? We've got the same swallow the camel, okay, and strain at the gnat. Because this is the camel, okay? We'll just ignore this. That this doesn't matter. Just don't look at it. Don't even go there, okay? Because what we've got to focus on is this, you know? We've got to focus on these drugs. Because they're really dangerous. Are they? Are they really dangerous? What? When you go to, when the Sun apparently went to Parliament and every toilet was had traces of cocaine in it, nearly. When we know the bankers are all on these illegal drugs. When we know that they're prolific in the upper echelons Oh, but if they get caught with drugs, it's a slap on the wrist and off to rehab for a couple of weeks, or maybe a bit of community service. But if anybody from the lower orders gets caught with them, oh my gosh, in jail. This is a very serious matter. That not only are people robbed of choice, but they are actually using that robbery of choice and criminalising that choice in order to, what, undermine our societies, our communities, with an undercurrent of crime that's operating on huge profits and actually includes child trafficking and child abuse and child pornography. So, and our police are saying they haven't got enough time. They've not got enough time or resources to investigate children's crime reports and arrest child abusers. But child abusers are having a massive, terrible impact on the consciousness of the next generation, and is creating the likelihood of ever increasing dependence on illegal drugs. So what are we going to do? Something's got to give here. Are we going to abandon prohibition and instead start protecting our children? Give our police resources so they can immediately go and arrest a child abuser. Straight away, tip off. A child's giving a crime report, that's a tip off. When a child's given a crime report, treat it like a drugs tip off. Go and immediately search that person's home. Go and immediately arrest them and investigate them. Treat their crimes as seriously as you treat the drugs crimes. Now, but get rid of this. Get rid of prohibition. Remove prohibition. End it. Legalise it. Okay? Let people, educate people. Education. In every country where prohibition has been ended, the problems with addiction and crime rates have dropped. And we need to understand that. So we need to stop straining at the gnats, don't we? And swallowing the camels. We need to get real, don't we? We need to accept the truth. That really, what kind of government is it that is so concerned about us all breathing in a bit of tobacco smoke, but they're really not bothered at all about the fact that we are literally being encouraged to take our children to be injected with autism and any other behavioural problem or psychological problem that they might develop as a direct result. And we're prepared to take that risk because, you know, the fact is, not everybody who smokes will get cancer. We know that it increases the risk. So, you know, therefore, the ban. It's not a given, is it, that everybody who smokes is going to die of cancer, or that everybody who doesn't smoke won't get cancer. But we know that the risk is increased. That's the most that can be said about it. Well, now we know that the risk is very highly increased with this aluminium adjuvant, that our children will get autism. So it's the same balance, isn't it? Increased risk. And we need to get real with this. And I find it very, very, very disturbing. We all should be disturbed as a nation when you know, people like Professor Chris Exley, who's dedicated his life to just studying medicine, healthcare on behalf of humanity, okay, that he is getting death threats. Why? Why? Why is it so important that our children continue to be injected with aluminium adjuvant when we know that it increases the risk of autism and probably a host of other behavioural and learning disorders and psychological problems? How? So I think now is the time for people to wise up, refuse to swallow the camel, okay, ignore the gnat, waft the gnat away. A bit of tobacco smoke is no major problem. The drugs are no don't need to be criminalised. We don't need prohibition. It is not serving any purposes. Our children need help. The crimes against children are a crime against humanity. Okay, and our children, not only is the society ignoring child sexual abuse, it's also ignoring the kind of child abuse that's going on by Big Pharma. And instead, like I say, all our police, you know, oh, they've got to focus on illegal drugs and, you know, finding people because they're being caught smoking in a pub. So please, let's get it right. Let's get lawful. Stand up, and please do stand by Professor Christopher Exley, and I'll leave the link underneath this. Please research this for yourself. This is very serious, and it's now time to speak out. So thank you very much for taking the time to listen. And if we want to protect our children, then have a look at the EU Child Protection Directives. I know that we're out of the EU, but like I've said before, you know, we paid a lot of money into it, so let's take something good out of it with us now that apparently we've left. Let's have the Child Protection Directives. Thank you very much.